I kind of figured what I would like to do is break down the structure of how I'm using the Fruit of Life pattern, just so that we can kind of have a code of what the inner aspect and the outer aspect, the bottom and top, the left and right, how these quadrants work out. So if we just go ahead and start with the flower of life, this is all of the spheres that are interlocking. Oftentimes you see it kind of broken off with a circle that's around it. I'm not using it like that. I'm using it fully expanded. And I believe that this probably goes out infinitely as fields grow larger and larger. But let's just work with this size right here because this is reasonable. Now, if we start taking this structure apart and we start breaking it down to where it begins, we have something that's called the egg of life, which is these spheres right here. And then we go down one more level and then we have the seed of life. This is where we start that pattern of 6 around 1. You can see one sphere in the center. You have this one sphere right here. That's in the center. And then you start to see these 6 that branch off. They go around it. These interlocking 6 create what we're calling the seed of life, or what, in sacred geometry people call the seed of life. So then from there, you're going to start to see that you have these points that from the center, they radiate out these rays, this like atomic ray, this structure that then starts to make what we look at as molecules and compounds. And then we start to have the square, triangles. We start to see different shapes forming, all from having this one sphere and 6 around it. And this isn't necessarily something that's made up. This is mirrored in nature. So what I'm doing is I'm using this formula of how everything is a superstructure. It's built on a foundation of something that's on the inside, and that's what's building the outside. So let's go ahead and remove some of our little illustrations here. And then let's go back to the seed of life. So from the seed of life, we have the egg of life. And then we start to have something that is going to be seen as the zona pellucida. This is the nucleus. This is how, when I'm looking at the fruit of life, let's go ahead and pop that in there. When I'm looking at the fruit of life, these 7 interspheres that we have here, these are the nucleus of the quantum memoir. This is like the center foundation of the quantum memoir. This is the seed that is going to grow the entire thought form. Okay, so let's go back to the seed and then the egg. So now we have this nucleus, this egg, this shell of the thought form that we're creating. And then it's going to have outer spheres, as you see in the fruit of life. These are the ones that I'm calling the potentials. So we have the seed, that's the structure on the inside. Now we have the potential of what the seed is going to be. Like, what life form? Is it going to be a tree, a human, a galaxy? Now we have these 6 outer potentials that are going to grow into something else. We have that atomic ray that starts to build off of that and create 6 more potentials. So this is kind of like the playground of how we're using this sacred geometry shape. And you can see that if we remove that zona pellucida, you can see that fruit of life, the orange spheres, inside the flower of life. See how it's in there? So what I'm doing is I'm just focusing on this fruit of life. So now let's go ahead and remove our flower of life entirely, and let's just focus on the fruit of life here in the orange. I'm going to convert it to black just so it's a little bit easier to see. Now that we have the fruit of life and we know where the zona pellucida is, that nucleus of our inner 7 seed words, kind of representing the molecule, the compound that we're making for whatever these outer potentials are going to be. So now let's talk about the vector equilibrium. This is a Buckminster Fuller idea that I've pulled into all of this in my research of the fruit of life pattern. And with the vector equilibrium, it's still the same idea, the 6 around 1, or the 12 outer spheres around the center sphere. So this is basically a growth pattern. And so that's why I use the vector equilibrium in some of my art and some of my kind of like my manifestations or my intention setting. Because to me, this is where I'm balancing the yin and yang idea. I'm taking the waxing and waning, the life and the death, and making it into a third thing, which would be a new creation. So it's, it's highly symbolic, but it's definitely rooted in sacred geometry and the science of Buckminster Fuller, or the philosophy of Buckminster Fuller. So now we have this fruit of life. And if we look at the fruit of life, no longer as just a flat plane, like right now it very much looks like a flat plane. Even if we look at the flower of life, it represents something that is three-dimensional, that has depth to it, but we're only looking at it, like on a flat piece of paper here on the digital screen. However, this fruit of life definitely has depth, and you can kind of see it when I make these fruit arrays right here. This is like my dimensional attempt at showing you what it would look like to have this in full dimensions. So now if we go back to looking at the zona pellucida, that inner nucleus of this fruit of life pattern, where I put the 7 seed words in there, you can start to see that there is a specific stacking of how when this starts to get dimensional, they are on top and then they are underneath the actual plane of the fruit of life. So you can see that the blue ones are on top of the red ones, but in between there are these spheres of what we call the fruit of life. So what we're really looking at when we look at the fruit of life pattern is just a plane of spheres. There's actually a physical dimension that we can start to illustrate, or if you make a third dimensional representation, you'll start to see it in a whole different way. So I'm going to go ahead and remove that zona pellucida and get rid of my third dimensional fruit of life. We're just going to go back to the plain flat fruit of life pattern that we write in. And when I say plain, I mean Plane, not necessarily Plain, right? So what else do we have to share here? Oh, the Merkaba. Also called Metatron. So with Metatron, we also have him or it illustrated in this fruit of life pattern. You can see that here. You see the triangles, the 2 triangles. We have the downward facing triangle, which I believe is the yin energy. And then we have the upward facing triangle, which is the yang energy. So we have these 2 triangles together, and that kind of creates that equilibrium, the balance right there of the vector equilibrium. You see how it overlaps into there. So that's why I work with this vector equilibrium, because it represents the same code of the fruit of life or of Metatron. So then if you also connect the outer points of Metatron's shape, then we have that, what I would call a molecule or the compound. This is where those 6 points represent our newest potentials. So that's Metatron. Let's go ahead and hide him. I guess I'd see him as a him. So that's the quantum memoir fruit of life concept, kind of philosophy that I've built my practice on. So now let's go ahead and talk about the 7 seed words and how it plays out with the seasons. Okay, so now we know that the fruit of life pattern, as I'm conceiving it, is not flat, it's not circles, it's spheres. And not only is it dimensional as spheres, but it also moves. So even though we're looking at a static image that's not moving, my conception of it is that it moves. And how I conceive that is by really looking at the quadrants of this fruit of life pattern. So let's break down, before we move to our hero's journey map, let's just break down the quadrants real quick. So what we have is very clearly we have this vertical plane. And I'm still playing with the idea if I want to call this the vertical or horizontal plane. But at this point, this is what I've decided on. That this cross section here is the vertical plane. This is when you start to see the hemisphere of the fruit of life pattern, where you see the left and right hand side, or you see the horizon here at the horizontal plane. You have a above and a below. So let me just get rid of the fruit of life pattern here for a moment, so you can see that we have a quadrant here. And then when we break down the aspects of those arrays, the branches that come out, then you start to have this horizontal plane, this other direction. So now we have these 8 rays that are breaking up the fruit of life pattern. So then you have the seasons, and then you also have the moon cycle shown in there, and we'll get into that when we look at the actual hero's journey. Then we start to have time. If we have this cycle of time, we have a clock, we have noon, and we have midnight. So you can start to see that this fruit of life pattern very easily and quickly takes on the shape of a dial, of a cycle of time, whether it be the sun, whether it be the moon, whether it be a day. So then you start to have this representation of things working in a macro way in this cycle and then in a micro way. They're overlapping and interlocking between each other. So this is how I'm looking at the motion of the fruit of life pattern and how I use it for the quantum memoir, and then ultimately the hero's journey. So let's see. There would be one more element that might be useful to show, which is the yin-yang element. So let me take away these time quadrants. And then let's just look at this outer ring. Let's just look at the fruit of life as if it's one giant field or sphere of energy. And in that energy, you're going to have the duality of it. You're going to have a yin and a yang. So I very clearly in my work, if you follow it, you're going to see that I have this yin energy down at the bottom. This is the winter. This is the new moon. This is the nighttime. And then I have my upper yang energy. So then what starts to happen is when these are rotating around, it's going clockwise from one side, like if you were on the other side, and then I work with it counterclockwise as we're looking at it right now. So you just start to see that these are in motion, and these little dots of the yin and yang are moving through those different branches and fractals or arms of the fruit of life pattern. And that's how I work with it. So then you can see as we go back to bringing in the vertical plane, we have the upper yang is above the vertical plane, and then the lower yin is below the vertical plane. And so both the yin and yang in this very still shot of this are in the left and right hemisphere, but we could easily rotate it to where the yang and the yin would be in left and right hemispheres. So you can see how even though when I'm illustrating it in my books and in my artwork, it's very static because I can't illustrate the movement of it. But in the conception of how I'm putting my intentions into it, I very much have a representation in my mind that this is in motion and that I'm putting things in motion as I'm working with it. So now let's go ahead and go over and look at our hero's journey mind map, or at least the one that I have as a template for my quantum memoir practice. So we have the fruit of life pattern. We already know that. We've established that. We've established that it has this inner nucleus, this seed which becomes the egg, and that nucleus contains the foundation of whatever our thought form is going to be. In this case, using the quantum memoir, we have 7 inner seed words. The innermost one is purpose. And then if you want to go through like a linear way of doing this cyclic cycle, then I would go down to ground, down here at the bottom. Then we have intend, observe, connect at the top, express, and refine. So we have this cycle that we can rotate through in an anti-clockwise manner. Or you can just pop around and fill them in as the information comes up. It's not so much of a matter of how you fill these in, just that the entire nucleus, the entire egg or seed is formed with a foundation of ideas. So once we have that inner seed kind of nucleus created, then we're going to go to move to the outer seed words. And I'm going to remove the nucleus. Now we have these outer seed words. They basically represent something that is attached to the inner seed word. So in this case, we have initiate off of the ground sphere. And I use this in my solar and my lunar cycle. So to me, these outer seed words help identify and represent the motion through that seasonal change of life, the 4 seasons that we'll get into in a moment. Then off of intend, I have activate. So at this point, I start activating. Then we come up off of observe and we have evaluate. Off of connect, we have elevate. Off of express, we have accelerate. And then off of refine, we have integrate. So we have 6 more potentials that come off of the inner potentials of the seed words. All of these relate back to the purpose in the center. So now that we know, we've already established that there's a very specific relationship between the upper and the lower, the left and the right-hand side, the inner and the outer. You start to see how now these words relate to one another. If I'll just make a little doodle here. So you can see that intend will relate to express because it's on the same axis. okay? You'll see that ground relates to connect because it's on the same, it's on the opposite plane from one another. So you start to see and build these relationships between the placement, the coordinate of the spheres, and the words that relate to it, okay? So now we have the outer seed words. We're going to pull up those directions, the 4 directions. This is the coordinates that we use on a plane, the geographical plane of the surface of the planet. These are not necessarily coordinates that represent space in a spherical way. This is still looking at our map as a flat page. So we're very familiar with the northeast, south and west, never eat shredded wheats. We have that clockwise rotation. But what we've learned in the previous video is that it's clockwise, but that's only from one point of view, as looking at it directly. If we think of the yin and yang, and this starts to get a little bit complicated, I think, but once you start playing with it, you'll see that the yin and yang can flow. Let's make it spin. The yin and yang can flow in a counterclockwise, direction. But then also it could flow in the other direction had I, drawn it, in its reverse state. Because what happens is if you're in front of it or behind it, that's going to display which way this is, appearing to go, if it's going clockwise or counterclockwise. So what we've learned, or what I've recognized that I've learned in my grammar school teaching about clockwise and counterclockwise, they're not actually separate things. You can't really divide them necessarily, except for in a representation of, one point of view, one plane. But in the actual truth, both are happening at the same time. So enough of the yin and yang. So you can see that there's that energy flow between the directions. So now let's continue adding some more labels here on our map. We know that the map represents a flat plane, just a, a two-dimensional length and width type of thing. But we're also going to be labeling it in a way that we can create motion. And that's how we're going to work with the seasons, the day and night cycle. So if you look at the north and the south, you can see that they represent night and day on the map, which also would represent winter and summer, and the new moon and the full moon. You can see how these periods of time are either short or longer, and they are consistent. They mirror up to one another. They match up. And so when we look at the lunar rotation, this is when you really start to see how time plays into this hero's journey, this map. Not only how I use it in my own personal practice, but the actual hero's journey. We're starting out here in the dark in Initiate. We're going out, but we haven't, found the light of day yet, right? We're just starting. And so then you can see over here in the waxing crescent moon phase, we can start to see light is building up. And so then light builds up all the way to the full moon, the summer solstice of Elevate. And then it comes back down and heads towards the waning crescent moon, which would be our integrate sphere, before we start the cycle again. So this starts to add that journey, the motion of going through the fruit of life pattern. Now you can see it once we add the lunation symbols in there. You can see how we're going to be taking this flow of the yin and yang and really moving around with it. So now you can see how it's moving around in this full moon, or this lunation system that we have between new moons and full moons. You can see how it's rotating, and I'm using it clockwise. And this is not an absolute. You can go counterclockwise if that's what you prefer. It doesn't really, I don't think it really matters, because like I'm saying, it's both are happening at the same time. It's only the point of view that you're choosing to look from. So now we're going to add the actual hero's journey mind map. So this is the classical representation of the hero's journey, broken down into a few steps, and it's overlaid with my quantum memoir practice. And so now you can kind of see everything, overlapping. I'm going to start taking away the elements so then we could just talk about the hero's journey. But first, let's add the seasons. So now that you have the color in here, you can really start to see and distinguish the difference between, down here, the red, the root chakra, the winter, the night, the inward, the initiation. And then over here we have spring, we have the east, we have everything starting to wax with the light starting to become brighter. You're crossing the threshold of that horizon line that we established. And then we're coming up here to the light of day, the outward, the above, the summer solstice. This is the north. Now you're getting to elevate and seize the treasure. And then you're coming over here to the west, which is the fall. It's coming back home. Things are speeding up and you're starting to integrate. And then you return back to the new moon. So this is the color representation of the seasons and how you go through it. But I've also represented the chakras within here. We have the root chakra, and then we come over to the sacral chakra. When we start to activate the energy, we start to create. And then you're going to need confidence to cross the threshold with the solar plexus. And then up here at the top, you have your heart. You're connecting to the big ordeal. You're overcoming, everything at this point with the heart chakra. And then you have the throat chakra over here in express. You're accelerating, you're confident, you're coming back home with your treasure. And then down here we have the third eye. The third eye is where we're refining. We're using that inner wisdom to represent what is the lesson of this entire cycle. And then I use the crown chakra for the purpose. This is the full channel of the information that's coming through into the purpose. So I can show you and just highlight that right there. We got the crown chakra in the center. So I'm going to leave the colors here and the Hero's Journey mind map, but now let's start taking away those other labels. I'm going to remove the yin yang. So remember, this represents the masculine and feminine flow of going through this actual entire journey. And then we have the lunations. The lunations is also representing that dark spot, that inner subconscious call that's calling out to you. And then we're moving up through the full moon where we're getting the awakening, the enlightenment, the new piece of information, and then we're coming back to integrate it. So we're going to take away the lunar part. And then we have the day and night cycle. So the day and night, we don't necessarily need that in the hero's journey, but it's good to understand the aspect of time in this rotation of how you can look at it in a very micro way and a very macro way. And then we have our 4 directions. These actually work out quite well. So now that we actually have the map laid out of the hero's journey overlaid with the quantum memoir, let's just take a real quick jog through it. We have the purpose. So the purpose would be something like, your hero's journey is that you want to stop having sugar. So my purpose is to, refuse sugar. I would want to find a positive way. So satisfy my sweet tooth would be my purpose. This is the hero's journey that I'm going out on. And then I would find some sort of idea to ground that purpose that I'm doing. And then I would move down to initiate. Initiate is basically, I would be looking for a healthier lifestyle. I want to take better care of this body. So in essence, by filling out the ground and initiate sphere, I have now heard the call to adventure and I'm going out on that adventure. So what I'm doing is now I'm going to be moving over here to the intend sphere. It's an intention that's going to support my purpose. It's kind of like an affirmation. And I'm going to activate whatever that idea is. So this is the activation is basically finding that creative fire within you, meeting the mentor, the archetype that's going to help you on this hero's journey. So then once I have my intend and activate spheres filled in, I've recognized that I've met the mentor, and now I'm going to cross the threshold. I'm going from the inner world down here. This is the inner world down here below this east-west horizon line. And now what I'm going to be doing on this hero's journey that I'm taking in this example is I'm going to be coming above that horizon line. I'm heading east and I've crossed the threshold. Now I'm going to observe. I'm going to gather information from how I can fulfill this purpose of sugar cravings. And I'm going to evaluate that. I'm going to look for opportunities that I will be able to have success. And so this is crossing the threshold of where I was and where I'm going. And then here at the top, this is the northward direction, the outward. Now I'm out in the world and I'm connecting to something that I can appreciate, likely an archetype that would help me have discipline and inspiration to overcome the sugar craving that I have. And then I would be elevating. I'm just going to really take a zenith perspective of what my success is on this hero's journey so far, and really give gratitude and appreciation to that, really connect to that feeling with my heart chakra right here. So basically at this point, I've seized the treasure. I've recognized, how to overcome this sugar craving, this purpose, and now I feel the success imminent. And here's where I get to express that success. I'm heading back home. I'm implementing the discipline that I've picked up. I'm accelerating the progress that I'm making with my purpose. Okay. And then we're heading west. We're coming down here. We're going to come back into our inner world, coming back home. We're going to refine the lesson. We're going to enhance the lesson that I've learned. I'm going to integrate it into my life. And then this is when I return with the elixir. I come back to my purpose, and I come back to my ground, and then I can start a new hero's journey from there. So then I suppose if you have any questions, if there's anything that you want to add, let me know. If you would like to get a copy of this template, send me a message and I can get it over to you, and you can try playing with it yourself. Thanks for watching.